We are Technimatic. I'm Andy.
And I'm Peter.
And we've just released an album on Shogun Audio called Desire Paths. And then we've been working together for how long?
About 2007, something like that.
Yeah, so a good few years. And we've always worked, certainly in terms of our writing, the same way since we've met each other, with very little kind of changes. So we're going to kind of take you through how we go about working and how we piece a track together from scratch.
We're going to use night vision, aren't we?
Yeah, from our album. So yeah, enjoy.
I guess the first thing to explain is, much like a lot of people these days, we don't actually spend that much time in the studio together. The way we generally work is we send tunes back and forth over AIM, and one person works on them, then the other person adds something, and we chat about it on email and on the phone and stuff. So we thought the best way to explain this track is to play you the first sketch that you sent me.
Yeah, the very first. So kind of like what often happens when we're building up an idea is, one of us will start with a sketch. It could be something really, really basic. And then as Pete says, because we don't get to work together that much physically in the same place, we kind of send that, and then the other person will say, yeah, I'm into that, and maybe develop it a bit further. So this is the very first. This is how this track sounded when it was just in a kind of sketch form.
Golf Idea 2.
Golf Idea 2, yeah.
I think this is it's basically just a pad and a beat, isn't it?
It's pretty much just a pad and a beat, and then I think there's a couple of piano licks on it as well. So it's kind of really, really straightforward. Yeah. And that's it, basically.
But, so Andy sent me that, and I mean, we swapped sketches quite a bit, but that one clearly had something that we liked. And decided to progress with that. So I guess the next thing is, I'm trying to remember what we did next. I think what basically happened was I put the horns on it.
Yeah.
And that kind of lifted the track into something. We thought, yeah, we can definitely turn this into something.
What we often do, like when we're writing, is there's two main pieces of software that we use. The first is Logic, Logic Pro. We haven't gone to Logic X yet, and Reason. And I think the bulk of our work comes out of Reason, doesn't it? And when we actually made this tune, we made it using Reason 3. And we've only just upgraded to Reason 7. And we were going to open this in Reason 3 so we could show you how we did it in that, but because we've now upgraded and everything, it won't let us open it anymore. So we can only show you in Reason 7. So as Pete was saying, it started out with that pad sound, and the pad sound itself, I think,
floaty vibes, that's part of it.
Yeah.
That's that kind of
yeah, it's a lot of the way we work is we kind of start off with either, as you heard from the sketch, maybe a sound or a piece of music or a sample or a pad or like just, anything, and then we'll kind of throw a generic beat on the top to get a feel. So this very first thing, I'll see if we can actually find what it originated from. Okay.
There you go.
So that, all that is it's set up in a Dr. Rex player in Reason, and it's a sample called Carrot Vox. Where did that come from? Do you know where that?
No idea. I mean, basically, we've got, I guess, we both have strengths and weaknesses when it comes to making tracks. One of my strengths is definitely collecting samples. And we've got a big folder full of stuff which I sort of regularly update. generally we just go through and just there's so much stuff in there that eventually you'll find something that sounds, you know, that works. And I think that's just, I can't remember what that is exactly, but
well, it's because what happened is when obviously, you know, when Pete's got this sample, we chop it up in recycle.
Yeah, everything's chopped up, isn't it?
Everything's chopped up in recycle. We just find that way we kind of, even though a lot of people might take samples and say put them into Logic and then time stretch them and move them around, it's kind of like, I suppose the most important thing is that there's no sort of right or wrong. It's very much kind of working the way that you think is a good way for you to work and you feel comfortable with, and you get the result that you want.
And because we've used Reason 3 up until just last week, you know, we've used it for so long, and you know, with Reason 3 you can't use audio. You know, everything has to be chopped up and brought in. I guess the kind of that weakness has become one of our strengths. You know, we've just made it work for us.
Sure.
And yeah, so it's just about building up those layers of sounds, really.
So the original kind of stab of this, so this was a vocal, so once you open it up into recycle, you get all the different slices separated out.
What else is in there? What?
Well, this is what I was going to... So this is kind of the original...
Oh yeah, I know what it is. Yeah.
The original sound. So it's just a kind of very strange, like, atmospheric vocal, isn't it? That's basically the original sample. So we chose to just use a tiny, tiny slab of that, which is this, and it literally only runs for that length of time. It's just a, and on top of that, we put in Reason. There's this fantastic reverb unit called an RV 7000. Very basic reverb, hall. Not too big, not too wet, and then so over the top of that you then just get this lovely kind of, so that's the first part of the sound. And then the way we kind of work is we'll take certainly for the music, we then just build on top of that, and that'll come from samples, that'll come from synths, that'll come from,
So add in like all the other stuff that's in that intro. There's just like various bits of music.
So on top of that, I'll set this up as a loop actually. So you've got that weird sound, and we've got this floaty vibes, which is...
and it's all about, you know, with the kind of music we make, particularly that kind of sort of high energy liquid, you want to make it feel as full and as warm as possible. So when we're adding all these sounds, we're just sort of getting into our mind, you know, it needs to feel nice and chunky, you know.
That floaty vibes, we went through kind of the same process again. So that started out as a string sound. Let me just take the filter off, which is just...
just another sample.
And then all we've done is we've filtered it down, added a little bit of resonance, and we've also put an LFO on the left and right channel. So what it does is the LFO very subtly kind of shoots it left and right across the speakers, which makes it kind of really interesting in your headphones, and hopefully interesting when you listen to it on stereo at home as well. So that's that.
What else have you got in there? Coltrane Harp.
Yep, Coltrane Harp. So we'll add that in as well.
That's the kind of riff you get.
And that's just like a that is just a harp sound again, taken from a sample. We've taken some of the high end off of that.
It kind of filters up though towards the thing
later on, put a maximizer on it just to kind of get the most out of the sample, because it wasn't a particularly loud sample to start with, and we just wanted to pull out as much as we could. And yeah, and as Pete says, it's got a filter on it as well, so that comes up a bit later on. What else we got? This repeat pattern.
No idea what that is. Oh right, okay. So So that's kind of like kind of a classic kind of white noisy sound to, I don't know, just it gives it a bit more space and a kind of a bigger, feel to it.
Yeah.
When you're making a kind of, sometimes we'll make tracks which are kind of more introspective and deep, but with this one, which is sort of aimed squarely sort of at dance floors, that kind of white noise stuff is really, really important. It gives you that energy and that intensity, which I think you always need.
Definitely. We tend to kind of layer things together, and it's really important to try and imagine, when you throw in lots of musical sounds into something, you do have to try and think about what space each of those sounds is going to occupy. So like, there's no point in throwing like loads of bass sounds in, or loads of mid-range sounds in, or loads of top-end sounds, because ultimately your range of frequencies are just going to sound muddy, and they're going to interfere with each other, and once you play it out in a nightclub, they'll sound terrible. So when we kind of create and we write initially, we don't really think about that too much, other than a vibe and what sounds good. But then as we go along, we start to shape each sound to make sure that they're not going to interfere with each other. And one of the parts of the process is we take out a lot of bottom end in most of the musical sounds, which we'll come to a little bit later. But we take out a lot of the bottom end and then fill it with organ sounds.
Yeah, quite often. We use a lot of organs in our tracks.
We do. Yeah, we do. Yeah,
big fan of organs. In various ways, really, because the organ, Hammond organs and such, they've got such a lovely, warm, versatile sound. You can use them to fill up so many different types of frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And in this one, I think we've got a couple of. Have we got a couple of organs?
Yeah, so like I think to start off with, there's one organ which is this one. But you probably can't. You can't
even hear it.
You can't quite hear it. It's basically two notes, which is a B flat and a D. Oh. And those two, if we play that kind of like on its own, then you'll really hear it.
I think as the track progresses, it increases as well.
Yeah.
You get more notes, and we'll build it up, so it kind of works as a sort of crescendo effect.
Yeah.
It builds up, so you get an increase in tension as it leads up to the drop. And we'll use organs to provide a nice sort of thick, not sub obviously, but a nice bass to the kind of music. It feels like they kind of glue lots of sounds together as well. If you add, if you work with organs and if you're using lots of different samples and you get some nice chords going on with organs, it kind of it just feels like it glues the sound together quite nicely.
And it's something that we've used like on various different tracks. We use them to different effects. So as Pete says, like on the intro here, they're quite high notes, and those high notes give this real intensity to the sound. And then we automate the volume of that as the track goes on, so you get this kind of idea of something building. But you wouldn't even really know it's there. It is very much there as a functional thing. And then you can probably see like later on in the track, there's even more notes kind of in that organ that add in to kind of add, again, more elements of intensity, or to kind of add a build from the intro up to
you've got this
the main drop.
You've got this other organ here, which is doing a different kind of job. So it's just all about building up that nice thick sound basically with all these, isn't it?
Yeah, because I think that one that you were saying, that first one is basically plays some very subtle, more sort of mid-range notes, doesn't it? And then there's occasionally you'll get like a nice bottom end note as well, like that one, which those notes don't sit, say, where a sub bass would sit, but they sit in a nice range, so that that whole kind of bit of music at the beginning sounds full and rounded and warm.
I should also say, like, both Andy and I have not really had any training in making, you know, in the technological side of making music. So it is very much, it's been trial and error from the start.
Definitely.
And just through tune after tune after tune, we've kind of worked out certain ways that work, certain ways that don't work. But you know, I'm sure we do a load of stuff that a lot of sort of technical people would go,
what are they doing?
What are they doing?
Yeah,
you know,
definitely, yeah.
I think it goes to show, you know, there isn't a set way, and you know, you can, as long as it sounds good and it's kind of ticking certain essential boxes in terms of the engineering, you can kind of get away with doing all sorts of all sorts of different stuff, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Because obviously we made this in Reason 3 originally, and Reason 3 is, I mean, we loved it, but it you know, it doesn't have VSTs, and it doesn't have this huge bank of you know, a million and one sounds. So when we call in something that isn't a sample, it's very much just the stuff in the basic Reason folder, isn't it? Just the libraries.
Yeah, because Reason's got this wonderful library of refills that you can get access to. And these refills have loads of different, as Pete says, loads of different sounds. So the organ comes from, what is the refill called?
Electromechanical. That's the one we use pretty much every single track.
Yeah.
It's just got like Rhodes, organs, certain synths.
And in that there is a patch that's called full bars. Yeah.
We use high bars and full bars. And sometimes a bit of Sunday radio as well.
Yeah. So that's kind of, that gives just that nice, just a really kind of full organ.
Yeah.
And yeah, we kind of we'll use those in various parts to kind of gel things together in the bottom end, gel things together in the mid-range, give an intensity in the top end. Yeah. What we'll do with a lot of the musical sounds in there is we will route those into Logic. So kind of everything that we do in Reason, when we come to mix it down, we send everything into Logic. Now, sometimes that can be as simple as all of the sounds go into one mixer in Reason, say samples, which we'll label as samples. And then we put that into Logic, into 2 rewire channels, and then we send that off to a fader, which is just labelled as samples. And then the beauty of doing that is it enables us to then EQ all of the music together, or apply effects to all of the music together. And also when we come to mix, it means that we can kind of pull the music up and down on one fader without having to like individually go through different things. We also never kind of get to a mix down where we flatten everything and start from scratch. We kind of mix everything as we go.
Yeah.
And then once we get to the end, it's just a case of balancing the music in relation to the bass, in relation to the beats, in relation to the effects or whatever. So all of the music goes to this samples fader, and then all we've done on that fader is we've put Fab Filter do a fantastic EQ called the Pro Q, and all we've done is we've put a low cut on all of the samples. For the intro, the low cut only sits at about 60 hertz, so that it gives the chance for those organ sounds and everything to feel full and nice. And then that's actually automated, so that later on in the track, that low cut moves, and it moves to about 105 hertz. By doing that, it means that the kick drums, the sub bass, they have room to just do their own thing, and that kind of range of frequencies is theirs. So no music interferes with it. And we do that across the board. So we'll put a low cut on effects, on vocals, basically everything other than the kick drum and the sub. And then that way you just get this lovely kind of nice bottom end.
Hopefully.
In theory. So all of our music parts are effectively in this fader. As we were saying earlier, we've got like the organ, we've got the classic kind of trumpet riff, horn riff that runs through it as well. All the organ sounds, loads of various kind of layers and different bits, which if we go through every single one, we will be here for the next hour.
Yeah,
but
we do tend to, I mean, I guess one of our strengths which is also one of our weaknesses, is we do tend to throw a lot of music at tunes, which people seem to really like, and I think that's why, you know, some people like our music, but it does then throw up various problems when it comes to mixing down and you know, that kind of stuff. We do add a lot of stuff into our tunes.
Yeah.
So yeah, if we went through every single element, it would take forever.
It would take
But
forever.
you get the basic idea there.
So the music as a whole part kind of sounds like this basically. So you've got little piano bits, little effects kind of noises, and we very much try and make everything sound interesting. So we want everything to have a job and have a space in that music and make something that makes your ears kind of go, what's that, what's that, what's that? So that is essentially all the music. You can hear the trumpet, the big trumpet riff that we use in the tune. That's running underneath, but it's filtered out completely. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else in there that we use that is. So this is the trumpet riff.
Fairly well known sample, which has been used before, but we thought, fuck it,
Why not? And that, as you can see under here, it has a filter running on it, which just slowly comes up, drops back down again, and this is in the breakdown of the tune, and just slowly climbs. At the same time, the resonance kind of goes the other way, so you get that lovely kind of real, overly emphasised opening of the filter, basically.
Once again, that's just chopped up in recycle. And I think in the main part of the track, it's never actually fully opened out. It's always just kind of filtered off to an extent. So you don't have to worry about the kind of original drums and percussion that were in, you know, the original sample. So that makes life a little bit easier. Yeah, but it's all just in blocks.
It's just little. If we turn off that filter so you can hear it properly. So yeah, it's all. Pete does a lot of the kind of chopping up and recycle, and so it's already just.
Here you go.
That's basically it, really. So that's all of the music, isn't it? And then, as I say, we just pop that into Logic. And we just put a Logic's own multimeter in as well, just so we could have a look and see what frequencies we're hitting where, and whether anything more drastic needed to be done with the Pro EQ. But all we really did was low cut it. That was it. There was nothing else that was majorly kind of jumping out. If there are things that, as we're kind of blending music together, we think, oh, that's got a bit too much top end, or that might have a bit too much mid range, or we might use just some of the built-in EQs in Logic, like on the trumpets there. We've just taken a little bit of top end off, taken a little bit of bottom end off, but it's all very minor, isn't it? It's not massively technical.
With us, it certainly isn't an exact science.
No.
I think, you know, as I said before, I think, you know, the likes of, you know, Calix and TV and you know, Emperor and those kind of guys, I mean, they'd probably be looking at this with their head in their hands.
Just going,
like, why are they doing that?
Yeah.
But, you know, we've got a system, it kind of works for us, and yeah, we're kind of trying to improve with every tune. I guess that's it, isn't it?
And definitely.
Yeah.
That's the music. So I guess we talk about beats. So the beats are maybe.
Are you? Because when we played that original sketch, the beat on that is just like a standard sample pack beat, isn't it? Did you base the beat on that, or did you do a new one? I think you used elements of that.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so let's just look at the beats on their own. What tends to happen with a lot of our drum beats is we'll start off with a break. As you heard on that sketch, that was just like a very basic break that we will probably get out of a sample pack, just so we can kind of get a vibe going, really. And because with drum and bass there's so many variances of old drum breaks that you can use that can dramatically change the vibe of a track in a second. What tends to happen is we'll just be, as we're sketching out, we'll kind of flick through breaks and think, oh, that break sounds cool, put it in. And then once that break is the basis, we'll then build the drums on top of that break and make them kind of more full. And so the original break, I think, which starts that off...
It's going to be one of these high pass breaks, isn't it?
Let's have a little look.
Is it that one?
I think it must be that one.
Yeah.
So that break, that first break, is effectively so it's this break called a hysterics break, which I think it comes out of a sample pack, but off the top of my head, I don't know.
Big D&B loops.
Yeah, so this is actually it's not a sample pack that exists. It's a pack. It's a collection of drum beats that we built up over time, and then kind of merged breaks together and just built our own little collection of drum beats to use. So this is one of them, called the hysterics break for whatever reason. And it's just got a high pass filter on it. So the original break without the high pass filter sounds like that. And all we've done is we've put a high pass filter on it. So it only really occupies that kind of area of the drum spectrum, I guess. So that's the first break that we've used. On top of that, there's another break, which again is high passed, and that one just sounds like this. Same kind of thing again, really. I'm not sure whether that was from a sample pack, whether it's a break that we've built up, but you know, rather than say just take drums, personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with using drums out of sample packs if you then kind of manipulate them, build them up and turn them into something that's your own. I mean, that's kind of the point of a sample pack, really. And I think a lot of people are scared to do that because, I don't know, maybe there's a thought that it's cheating in some way, but it's not. It just gives you a nice palette of sounds to then kind of to work from.
You feel comfortable with.
Yeah, so those two breaks together, same kind of thing. Recycle again. A lot of breaks that you get within sample packs come with the files already rexed. We prefer to use our beats in Dr. X because then we can move the hits around, we can change the flow of the break, we can tighten things, shorten things. So that's kind of just the way we prefer. Similar thing, it's all broken down to kick, hi-hat, snare drum.
We basically, the majority of the music we make is made in Rexes.
Is out of Rexes, yeah. Yeah, it is, yeah. Yeah.
If it's any kind of sampled like source from outside of Reason, it will be in a Dr. Rex.
Definitely, yeah. So this is again like a collection of layered breaks. So and each break does its own job. So you might, similar to the way we work with our music and our samples, you know, there might be a break that sits in the top end and gives all the kind of clattery rides and all the kind of hecticness. Then there might be a break that sort of exists more in the mid-range. Again, we try and everything that goes in kind of has its own place to do a job and kind of then make everything sound full and rounded and nice. So two breaks, both together, sound like this. On top of that, we'll then
rides one.
Yeah, that's like a.
That's the that's what you use from that original sketch. It's just that's all it is. Just the little.
You're right. So on the you're right. So on that original sketch, those we've now taken them, but we've just used them as
just the cymbals.
Yeah. But then layered those with the other two breaks we were talking about. So we obviously must have liked that energy from that original part. Yeah. on top of that, we'll add a really thick kick and snare. Now this is where it does get a little bit more scientific, but only in the sense that we've copied it from other people. So with that drum and bass, where the kick and the snare sit is quite integral to it working on a club system. Obviously, a lot of the music that you make is designed to be played loud in clubs, and the kick and the snare are the two parts that you really want to kind of hit people in the bottom of their chest. So once we've got that kind of basic break structure, we'll take all of those and we will take out maybe some nasty frequencies that exist in there. We'll take out all the bottom end, again to allow for the kick drum to kind of fill the space on its own.
I mean, we've got some little EQ cuts here and here. This is just to take a, you just do like a little EQ sweep across and see if anything really jumps out as being overly harsh.
Yeah.
Because you don't, if your track's going to be played at 100 decibels, any kind of really harshness in that top end can really hurt people's ears and just make it sound really unpleasant. So it's good to try and take as much out as you can without losing the character of the sound, because one of the problems is, I've found anyway, is you can go through and you can take out all of those harsh frequencies, but if you take all of them out, you end up with a sound that sounds nothing like the sound you originally loaded in, you got excited about. So it's kind of a balancing act. You have to leave a certain amount in there.
Definitely.
But too much of that harshness is not good.
No. And we have found sometimes, that there's been breaks that have had horrific frequencies in them, which the groove has been amazing.
Yeah.
But that harsh frequency has been so harsh that we're like,
and once you take once you take it all out, it just sounds crap. Sounds rubbish.
Yeah. So that's that's the first stage of our beats really. Get the breaks, merge them together, so there's different elements from each doing different jobs. One might be doing the tops, the mids, whatever. Reshuffle things around like we did with those rides, so we just use the ride part of that break, and then get them to all kind of glue together using EQs to get rid of nasty frequencies, take the bottom end out until we've got a nicely rounded basic break pattern, which we've now got. So then kick and snare. So with the kick drum, I have to refresh my memory on this, but again, the kick and the snare we tend to put straight into Logic, and then we use a lot of either plugins or bits of processing in Logic that might just have a bit more power than, say, some of the EQs and compressors in Reason. They'll just do kind of a better job. So we have just a thick kick and a snare. Which is just that. Those two...
Now these are called golf kick and golf snare. So are those ones that you've built up over a number of kicks and snares and then bounce back out?
I think basically what they are is they'll be... they could be a combination of kick sounds and tones, like one of which we'll use as being the big bottom end bit. And then there might be other kick drums which don't even have any low end on them, but the tone of them just works with the original.
Like a little snap.
So these are kind of, the kick, as Pete's saying, this is a kick and snare that we've kind of built up and made our own. And sometimes you might find that you find a really nice chunky kick and a nice chunky snare that does the job on their own. You don't have to layer things together.
No.
You just might find that it sounds better if you do. So the kick drum is just that. So we'll move back over to Logic. This kick drum is going through a little bit of processing, not a massive amount, but it's going through some. The first thing that it does is it's going through. The first thing we often do with the kicks is make sure that the frequencies are hitting in the right place. So if I just call up the Fab filter, so at the moment this kick drum, because we processed this before we kind of got to this stage, we often look for a kick drum to hit around between sort of 90 hertz, about 110 hertz. That's actually a trick that we learned off a tutorial video from Lodestar. and it really, really works. Like to really good effect. That kind of range of frequencies just seems to sound perfect on a PA system.
But you can be slightly flexible with
Yeah,
that, can't you? I mean,
definitely.
it's not like you must make a kick drum and it has to be within that frequency range, because sometimes you'll make a track where, I don't know, some of those. In fact, using Lodestar is a good example. Lomax, he's done some tracks. Some of his earlier tracks on Ram where it was just almost all bass, like those really big, thick bass line tunes, and those kicks sound like they've got a lot less, bottom end in them, just to allow that amount of bass.
Yeah.
So you can be flexible, but it's always a balancing act, isn't it, between the bass and the kick? It's always a balancing act.
And sometimes, we might sidechain it with the bass. If we want to use a kick that has loads of bottom end and we really don't want to lose that character, we'll sidechain it with the bass. But I mean, often we find it's nice to just find a kick drum that has the right frequency.
Yeah.
Take out all of this kind of bottom end where you want the sub to sit, and if they sit well together, great. It's like there is no kind of science to whether it's right or wrong. It's like if the kick drum works with just having that on it, with your bass, then great.
Yeah.
So the kick drum, you can see here, it's kind of like it's peaking at around sort of 100 hertz, and then everything underneath that we've completely rolled off and got rid of so that it doesn't interfere with the sub. And we also put in again. Another trick that we got is the Overdrive Unit in Logic. It's a really simple distortion plugin, and it just adds it kind of almost deceives your ears into thinking that the kick drum is louder than it actually is by adding a little bit of distortion. And whenever we add this, we put the tone all the way up. Don't very rarely add any drive. If we do, we might add maybe a decibel of drive or something, and that's it. And it just kind of it has this strange effect on your mind that kind of, because you can hear it slightly distorting, that tells your brain that it's massively loud, even though it isn't. So we'll often do that on both the kick and snare. So that's where the kick sits on this particular tune. Snare drum, same kind of deal. We've layered this up with various different other snare sounds, and we try and get the low mid-range part of a snare to hit at around between sort of 180 and about 250 hertz.
If you're going for that kind of dance floor track.
That classic,
Because obviously, if you're making a kind of more laid-back liquid tune, you're not going to want a big chunky 200 hertz snare in there.
No.
But it all depends on your aim for the track, your final kind of vision for it, and this one's definitely aimed at the dance floor.
Definitely.
So having that big fat snare is it's important.
Crucial. And this snare again, like on the frequencies, you can see there it's like very obviously hitting at around kind of 200 hertz, which will give you that lovely snap when it's on a PA rig, and then everything below that is gone, basically. We on the original snare that made up this one as a whole, we just cut everything out from under about 120 hertz. So you've got your kick drum hitting at 100, and that's just doing its thing in that range, and then everything from then above there on all the other sounds is cut out, which is why the snare kind of then just hits at around 200, but everything below it's gone. So it just gives each of those, the elements that you really want to kind of cut through a mix, they've got the breathing space to be able to do that. And then the last thing we did with the kick and snare, so generally speaking, we don't really tend to compress them much if they're good sounds. Bit of basic EQing, maybe a little bit of overdrive, and that is literally all that we do with the kick and snare.
I mean, with our type of music, I guess if you're making a heavier, kind of more techie sound, then you start to get into kind of hard compression a lot more, and you can almost use it as a kind of creative tool. But with the kind of music we make, it's just not really that necessary, we feel. Especially if you're getting samples from a sample pack, which have essentially been processed quite a bit already. You know, the danger is if you feel like, oh, you know, I've read on the internet that I should compress these drums, you may well cause more harm than good to your drums. You know, you shouldn't feel like it's absolutely necessary to, you know, squeeze everything. And, you know, with the music we make, you kind of don't have to as much. You know, you can kind of let things breathe a little bit more, which is good for us because we don't actually know how to do that stuff.
So another kind of crucial thing, and maybe this is just because we're so used to working with samples that are out of tune with each other, and we have to kind of spend quite a bit of time getting them, you know, moving, pitching them up, pitching them down, sometimes even as much as by tiny semitones or even further than that. One thing we then do is translate that with drums. So if you have a drum break, and in this case the drum break, as we were talking about earlier, that we made by layering breaks on top of each other, those breaks we've had to, at some stage, we've tuned to make them gel together. And then with the kick and snare, it's absolutely crucial that you make that kick tune with the kick in your breaks, and with the snare that you've made, the kind of chunky snare, you make sure that that is tuned with your breaks and with the track, because
possible.
Sometimes you've got a snare drum. A snare drum's kind of is a sound that has a very clear tone in a track. And we found before, haven't we, where if that tone isn't quite correct and it sounds out of tune with the music, it really sounds odd.
Everything.
Yeah. So in this case, we've taken the breaks and then just got the kick and the snare, and they are then layered on top, and we'll spend a while balancing them so the full drum sounds like this.
And then you've got a couple of other we've got some other little bits and bobs, haven't we?
So we've got on top of that, again, it's this question of trying to make everything sound full. So on top of that, we've added a line of congas, which just help everything along.
Love congas.
Got a lot of conga. We've added another set of rides as well.
Oh yeah, so that's, you know, those rides are really important actually. Those you love those rides.
Love those rides, man.
Those are Andy's special rides, which he actually adds in pretty much every track.
Everything we do, yeah.
But they're really great sound, and they're just that sheen, aren't they, over the top of everything.
Yeah.
And what else is? Oh, you've got your little ghost
mids. So again, this is just another little element. I'll show you that on its own, actually.
Ghost kick and snare as well.
Ghost kick and snare, yeah. So it gives the beat. So the ghost mids are these. So they're on their own sound a bit odd, but if you add that with our kick and snare, so you can hear it, it gives the track a roll. So
and if you put the kick and snare ghosts in as well, then you get that extra. You've kind of beefed up that kind of roll a bit more.
Yeah, so the kick and snare ghosts on their own just sound like
really, really rubbish.
Really shit. And then add that with what we went before, so the kick and snare.
Put those ghost mids in.
And the ghost mids. So already you've got like a nice kind of, like a full. Because often if you just do the classic drum and bass two-step of a boom tsh, and then just say add a hi-hat that runs, you will find that does sound very kind of flat and basic.
Yeah, it becomes,
and it doesn't run.
Well, it just harks back to breaks and funk. You know, it's
definitely
for us. You have to have some element of those kind of syncopated grooves in there, just to make it sound a little bit less like a computer's made it, even though we have made it on a computer.
Yeah.
You know, to try and...
It's a human element, isn't it?
Yeah, try and bring that kind of funk to it, which is essential for us anyway. You know, I'm sure lots of other people are different, but for us, you've got to have that in there. Even if it's like in something like this, which is fairly boom-tish, you've got to have some element of it in there at all times.
So all these extra little kind of elements just add. So you've got your breaks, then the kick and snare to beef those up. Then all these little extra elements of percussion that just help everything kind of run along. There's also a layer that we add, not all the time, but often. Like Pete was talking earlier about the rides in the top that give that kind of sheen. There's a phrase that I often use when we're making the drums, which is like a hectic layer.
Yeah.
And it does just give that sense of urgency and the fact that it's busy and in this track we use this thing as noisy percussive layer, which just sounds like this. And it kind of sits high enough up and it's fast enough to give you that sense of real hecticness, of just busyness and of...
Yeah.
But again, you've got to be really careful that you don't kind of throw loads of stuff into one area and then it just fights with each other and actually ends up cancelling each other out. So everything that we've got in this drum beat has a job. The congas have the job in the mid-range, kind of running things along. The breaks have their job of being the bassist. The kick and snare have their job of being the beef. The ghosts have that job of kind of tickling everything along, and so everything's doing something. It's not kind of thrown in for the sake of it. And then when you hear the drums all in one hit, so everything together sounds like.
As the track progresses, we've got just a couple of other elements which add. You've got some shakers coming up.
Yeah.
I think one's pan hard left, one pan hard right, so you kind of get a nice stereo feel to the beats. They're actually quite subtle in this track.
Really subtle,
And then I think the only other thing that we did on the beats was on the second drop, there's another thing that we add in. Where is it? I think it's called Loggy perk.
Obviously.
It's actually a percussion element I stole off Logistics.
So that's just all that is an extra bongo layer, which is. You've actually, there's quite a cool effect you put on that as well, haven't you? You've put that, you've made it, because that's actually running from speaker to speaker.
Yeah. It was just on the second drop, we kind of, on this track, if you're aware of it, we kind of becomes a little bit more intense. And I wanted to try and add something into the beat. The thing is, as Andy's played, everything's doing a job there. So to add in another element into that drum kit is actually quite difficult because it's pretty full as it is.
Definitely.
So the only way I could do it to get it to feel like it sat okay was to basically take off most of the top end, because already you've got these shakers, you've got these cymbals, and they're all doing their job. And so get rid of the top end. That doesn't need to be there. It's almost in this kind of high mid, it kind of cuts through, and also there's a slight kind of pan thing going on. So you kind of get it on a stereo. And it took a while to get to sit right, but I think it adds just an extra little intensive kind of kick up the backside. You
tightened it, so using the amp envelope on the Dr. S. You kind of tightened it a bit as well.
It's very tight, and I've actually increased the attack. I've just put the attack up slightly, so what can happen is quite often if you add another element in, the attack can start fighting with your kick and your snare, and you've worked so hard to get your kick and your snare and your break sounding really nice, and then you add in another element and it can start fighting with it. You've got so many transients, you've got so many things peaking at that very initial stage.
Yeah.
So just by taking the edge off it, it just lets it kind of just sit, just like sit slightly further back, and yeah.
Yeah,
that's it really. So that's all we've got time for at this stage. If you want to hear more about how we worked on this track, you need to buy the latest edition of Computer Music.
Download over 30 exclusive plugins. Get hundreds of pro-quality samples and power up your production skills with in-depth tutorials. We break it down for you step by step, and you'll see exactly how it's done in expert video guides and producer masterclass sessions with pro producers. Get all this and more with Computer Music Magazine every month on iPad and iPhone, PC and Mac, Android, and in print.